Bonjour, hello everyone. My name is Maksymilian Skrzypczak and this is another interview for Układ Sił. Today I'm joined by Léo Péria-Peigné, the great expert from IFRI, researcher on international security, and also the author of very recent report of IFRI with regard to the Polish army modernization until the year 2035. Hello, Leo.
Hello.
So, before we get into the technicalities, and I'll ask you about some more details with regard to the report, could you please just tell me and explain briefly the general direction in which the Polish army modernization is heading based on your findings?
Maybe it will be linked to why we made this study, honestly, because I'm mainly interested in defense industry and armament. And in 2022, Poland announced huge contracts that I think nobody in Europe saw since the end of the Cold War. And it pushed me to maybe interest myself a bit to what Poland was doing, because it was really a blind spot for the French research area. And nobody was actually really interested in what Poland was doing, mainly because of the Caracal affair back to 2015. And through interviews, you could feel that it was still poisoning the relationship between France and Poland. The very Eurosceptical Polish government was also not very helpful to bring them back. And both countries were living side by side, but not very together. So it changed with the elections in 2023, and the relations resumed pretty quickly, and then interest also resumed from France on what was Poland doing, even if I was working on this for 1 year already. And I had the occasion to push for the study for the French public to understand a bit better what is the Polish strategic culture, because we have some cliché, of course, on every country, everybody has, but in France, Poland was perceived as a very pro-Atlantic country, very anti-Russians, with some very good reasons to my mind, and very kind of hard to work with. I personally think that France is quite hard to work with also, so I wanted to make this quite extensive study, it's 90 pages, on, explaining to French public what is Poland, what are they doing, and why are they like this right now, and also to bring some nuance on is Poland only an Atlantic country, a pro-Atlantic country, or is it a bit more diverse? And we try to show this by showing that between the time Poland joined NATO and 2008, Poland was way more Atlantic country at that time. But now it's a bit different. So what we perceived what was very interesting as a French citizen on Polish evolution was actually the numbers, of course. In France, we have barely 1.5 division. We have 200 tanks. We hope to have 110 modern self-propelled howitzer. So on the ground forces, it was really amazing to see a country that wished to have more than 1,000 tanks and or stuff like 800 multiple rocket launchers, while in France we currently have 5. So that was the difference was so huge, and not only for France but actually for most European countries, that we had to explain this. That's why we actually produced several charts to illustrate this evolution. And you can find them in the study, which is free access, even it's not translated yet, I'm sorry for that, which are actually showing, maybe I can show it, you can show it in the video, but that are showing the huge disbalance between France, Germany, and Poland, because initially it was thought to be a study on a Weimar format, but everybody, when we went to Warsaw, was pretty angry at the Germans, so we said, oh, okay, maybe it's not the best time to do so. as we made big studies, exactly like the one we made here, on the Zeitenwende, the German rearmament process 2 years ago, so now it's a bit outdated, but at that time it was really an interrogation. So we have this Polish army, which is very different from the French one. France has the nuclear dissuasion, deterrence. Poland kind of wish to have, but do not have yet. But in the French strategic culture, deterrence is like the pillar, and everything is linked to it. So you have this difference. You have this French armed forces wish to be balanced between air, ground, navy. Okay, clearly in Poland the navy is set aside, even if they got more money right now, but they are still very limited, and most money go to ground and then air combat. So you have these huge differences that actually are kind of complementarities also, because we are strong in some parts where Poland is not, and Poland is becoming very strong in parts we are not anymore. And we do not plan yet to become any stronger. So we hoped to find some cooperation areas to promote, to push for a closer link between France and Poland. And we found several, even if they are pretty limited, because French defense industry is not able to provide what Poland needs, talking about numbers, figures, speed of the fast deliveries, and industrial offsets, so production in Poland and stuff like that. So we have very limited common platforms, actually. Maybe in the future with MRTTs, refueling aircraft, with maybe A400M transport aircraft, or maybe, who knows, submarines, it will be easier. But it was also a way to show that relationship is not only Poland buying to France. It's also what can we do to buy to Poland. And Poland, even if its defense industry is not complete, exhaustive, it still have very interesting aspects to provide, especially looking air defense. Like Poland was the only provider of armored tracked howitzer before the war started. So there are plenty of things like that. And in France, you always have this very, I think very French, but maybe just very nationalistic reflex, being, yeah, but they cannot provide anything that we cannot produce by ourselves. Like some days ago, France and Poland discussed, like only chatting, about buying Purun man-pads. The point is that in France, we do not produce any man-pads. We produce Mistral, which is an anti-aircraft rocket, light rocket, but it's absolutely not portable. It's fixed, it's static, and it can be put on a vehicle, maybe, but you cannot carry it on your back. So there are plenty of little things like that, and currently what is positive is that head of staff of French army and Polish army, General Kukua, seems to be getting very well along. And our whole point was, okay, the bosses, they are happy together, but we must go further and make the relationship go a bit more in the lower ranks, because both heads of staff will soon leave their functions. So if we do not want the beginning of relationship to be killed with their departure, we have to make it more perenne, including lower ranks. And then it's a bit harder because it's also a figure in the study. Head of ground, navy, and air forces in France and in Poland are very different ranks. Like it's 5-star generals in France, it's 3-star general in Poland. And all those little things are not actually helping. But France now is leaving Africa. To be fair, like we've been expelled from several countries, and even from the one we are staying, we plan to reduce the presence. It has been announced last year. So we are making our own pivot. Like the Americans are pivoting to Asia, and we are pivoting slowly but surely to Eastern Europe. And then we have to find partners for solid partnership. And Romania is a pretty nice ally. There are interesting capabilities, but they are not very ambitious for the armed forces. Estonia is limited by its size, it's limited by the size of its population and its means, even if they are still investing much more than many countries, proportionally speaking. So, partnership with Poland, especially after almost 10 years of cordial indifference, is maybe unavoidable as a partner, especially as it will grow the biggest army in Europe, added for ground forces. There are plenty of difficulties that are ahead, of course, like demography. The Polish demography is pretty bad. How to sustain such big forces, also very complicated. But still, we cannot look away from this dynamic. And what we try to show to French officers and French public is that even if Poland only do half of what it plans, it will already be the biggest army in Europe. So we must talk with them, we must work with them, and we can bring a mutual benefit to each other.
Sure, I loved your insights about how Polish and French forces can be somehow complementary. I would say it fits perfectly well into the grand strategic discussion about more self-sustainable Europe, militarily speaking. In this way, I would be curious, in your opinion, what's feasible for Poland when it comes to the end game of its army modernization? Because I see three base scenarios. One of them, the most ambitious one, perhaps the least realistic. I'm curious what you think about this. One of them is that we aim at sort of national strategic autonomy and the capability to defend our country, defend our territorial integrity more or less alone. Kind of the middle ground approach would be that the Poles do the majority of the heavy lifting with regard to the defense of the NATO eastern flank, and we field the majority of the land forces, substantial bulk of the air forces and logistics, and of course our territory plays a key role. However, we still rely on some kind of high-end enablers from other countries, for example, satellite intel from France. Scandinavia can provide substantial air force. However, the majority of the ground battle is conducted by the Poles. And finally, we have the scenario in which, despite huge buildup, Poland is still building an army that's supposed to operate within a NATO framework. So interoperability is the way to go, and even as Polish army grows, its role is still to defend Europe only as an element of the entire squadron, as opposed to force that can act on its own. What are your thoughts?
Where do you put the US in this?
That's a good question. Well, I would say it depends on the time frame. In the short run, that's my personal view, but many people in Poland think similarly. In the short run, it's first of all unlikely that the Americans will pull out entirely from Europe. And second of all, it's also unrealistic to expect from Europeans, including the Polish, that we will fill the gap for the Americans. However, in the long run, within, let's say, a couple of decades, well, the more time passes, probably the more realistic it will become that Europe will be able to field a more robust own deterrence posture.
Okay. I think Poland will not be able to field the initial plan of 300,000 soldiers, including the 50,000 territorial force of the vote. And I doubt the whole Korean contracts will be activated. Still, again, only half of it would already be huge. Meaning, whatever happens, Poland will become a major player in regarding security matters. Your third scenario, where Poland is only one brick among the others, I don't believe it. I think Poland is building an army not only to face Russia, but also to acquire a bigger place within Europe as a major power, at least regionally. So I don't actually believe in the first scenario. I don't believe in the third scenario. The second one, I think, will be decisive if Poland focus on regional aspects. And maybe I worked on military stockpiles a lot these last years, and it seems that everybody forgot what having military stockpiles is. Russia is fighting right now because it had the Soviet stockpiles. So I think one of the aspects of Poland's new might could be and would be interested to be a provider. It will buy a lot of stuff. It will never be able to fill it, the whole of it, like 1,600 tanks. It's huge, honestly. But maybe it will be the one that can make what nobody in Europe is able to make, except the US, stockpile. To, in case of crisis, be able to play a central and major role by providing smaller nations, including France, regarding the stockpiles, on ammunitions, systems, and maybe leave the coordination assets to the others. Maybe, because when you look at what Poland is doing with the global eyes, the AWACS planes, it's nothing. So I think taking care of the smaller nations by being central on the eastern flank would give Poland the role I think it seeks right now by making big announcements. Having these stockpiles will allow it to, of course, maybe help the others, but also to sustain an actual war with losses. It will not be like some European armies, like after 2 weeks of war, half of the systems are destroyed or unable to be used, and we will have to seek for peace because we will have very limited assets, except this nuclear deterrence, which is not a very desirable option. So that's my views on this. I think Poland has the potential, at least on material and industrial. Industrial, it's currently the Polish DTAB is not autonomous. Like on many things, Poland only master maybe a third of the supply chain for artillery ammunitions. It's heavily dependent on the CSG, the Czechoslovak group. It has very interesting parts, like I said, on air defense, but it lacks some part. We have to see what the Koreans will give as offsets, and it will be a huge part because it seems that the Koreans also think they made the contracts a bit quickly and are now a bit reluctant to give as much as they said they would. But still, it will be something. And it will maybe be able to do something that very few European DTAB can, mass producing, on maybe selective aspects, but that would already be something. Like, on a European scale, ammunition right now is less a problem than it was 3 years ago. We made a ramp up, we now produce more ammunition than the US as a whole continent. But we will have to focus on other parts, like manpads, as I said, anti-aircraft ammunitions. So this is mainly other people stuff right now. But in that part, maybe more than in the actual military capability, we can have some complementarity with nobody making everything, but everybody being very useful to the others. And in this place, again, Poland is able to have way bigger place than it ever had in the modern era.
Sure, that's a very optimistic, but I would say realistic assessment at the same time. That said, there are still some challenges ahead, and the report that you were one of the authors of mentions two major pillars of Polish modernization. I mean, of course, it outlines the general multidimensional build-up. However, the two main pillars that are underlined is that Poland puts emphasis on manpower and rapid scale-up of simply number of soldiers that it can recruit, and secondly, on its deep strike abilities, more particularly like long-range missile artillery and rocket deep strikes. Now, I would like to ask you first of all with regard to manpower. As you mentioned, and virtually all Polish experts would agree, Poland has serious demographic problems, which pose a challenge to its build-up plans. Now, you said that, in your opinion, the initial commitment of 300,000 troops is not really realistic. Also, it probably implies that the 6 divisions is not a really realistic outlook. Now, if that's the case, do you think Poland should simply do the same, but on a smaller scale, and just, limit its ambitions perhaps to 5 divisions and let's say 250,000 troops, but with the same concept, with the same framework? Or maybe, if our initial plans are not realistic, we should make up for the numbers with some other ways. For example, put even more emphasis on the deep strikes or other forms of modern warfare capabilities.
Looking at the acquisition targets, I think the deep strike part is well served for now. Like 800 rocket launcher is like considerable. Looking at what Ukraine did with 30 against the Russians, so that part is okay. Recreating one artillery brigade per division plus high command artillery brigade, it's something. I think the current Polish human resources plan is quite coherent. Like, you have 2 divisions fully manned with professional soldiers, you have 2 divisions of second tier with half, and 2 divisions of fully reservists and voluntary military service people. Okay, plus the WOT, the vote. So, looking like that, it's pretty coherent. The point is, coming from a ground forces with 60,000 operational forces, said as, it will not be that easy to fulfill that plan. Now, I saw that recently General Kukua even said that it could reach 400,000. Okay, looking at the composition of the 200,000 Poland is claiming to have, it's clearly quite far from the target regarding the actual composition, as it is 45,000 votes and 35,000 military service, or the others, I don't remember. So, we're not there. Now, maybe there are some alternatives, and again, what you try to explain in the study to the French public is that Polish ambition is not French ambition. It's more society-sized army, more than one big professional one, with huge effort on civilian formation, temporary formations, and different kind of reserve that can be mobilized, as also unemployment rate in Poland is so low that that kind of situation is maybe the worst enemy of armed forces, actually. So, I don't think it will reach 200,000 professionals. I don't think. Maybe I will be wrong. I don't know. I think there are several options that could be explored, like we are trying to do with the Belgium and Luxembourg right now, integrating several brigades of other countries, smaller countries around, within the Polish military structure. Like in the German military structure, every division has a Dutch brigade in it. That would be a way to circumvent a bit the manpower limitations it will meet, to my mind. Now, we'll see. It seems that the recruitment efforts are pretty well met so far. Will it meet its target? Time will tell. But I would not be that pessimistic. And again, I always insist when talking with French people, it's not 300,000 professionals serving 7 days a week. And that's maybe how to help people understand.
Sure, and with regard to the second part, the deep strike capabilities, often in the strategic debate, there's an opinion that a potential war between Russia and NATO, or even Russia versus NATO eastern flank, will look drastically different from what we see in Ukraine, precisely because NATO fights with depth, which means that we're striking primarily at the enemy's logistics, radioelectronic warfare capabilities, air defenses, control and command, and other sources of power, as opposed to power understood primitively as a soldier or a tank at the battlefield. So at the end, Russians might have huge quantitative advantage, but if their soldiers are starving, disoriented, they don't have their commanders, they don't have proper supplies, and also our Air Force is basically doing what it wants above their heads, then perhaps their numbers can only get them so far. However, this view is sometimes criticized from the perspective that numbers, and especially numbers of the Russian magnitude, at some point can be transferred into actual quality on the battlefield. Would you say that the war in Ukraine is actually a good demo of what the potential NATO-Russia war could look like? Or do those high-end deep strike capabilities and the fighting with depth on the NATO side actually flips the coin and makes it completely incomparable?
When you read Russian strategic literature written recently, but for the last 20 years it's the same, Russia, even if it does not respect European countries, they know that even without the US, the whole Europe together is a nut that will not be that easy to crack. Looking at how hard conquering 20% of Ukraine has been against a country that has 30 HIMARS and plenty of smaller and improvised UAVs, they learned for the last 3 years to fight a war that is very specific. And I think, of course, fighting the European countries will be very different, but they know it. They really know it. That's why they have been trying for the last 30 years to separate the US from the Europeans. They did. It seems, for now, like they pretty much did. But now what we have to do is to stay together as Europeans, because together, I think they will never attack us, honestly. They will not just achieve anything but huge losses, and maybe we will be a bit less frightened to strike within Russia with our own assets. But we also have to learn what the Ukrainians are doing, because they are doing pretty well against the oil infrastructure in Russia. So, honestly, we just have to stay together to appear strong, be strong actually, and then they will try nothing. After that, if they want to try anything else, they will meet a fate that is not very desirable, especially as Poland, the Baltics, and Finland are slowly getting out of Ottawa and Oslo conventions on landmines and cluster ammunition. So, deep strike is a thing. They know it. They also have capabilities we barely can defend from, to be completely fair. Maybe Poland will have because of the investment it made on multi-layered air defense. But if Russia will only attack if they feel Europe is very weak and if it's very not together, if it's separated. Without that, I doubt they try anything else than the usual hybrid warfare with cyber attack, disinformation, and things like that.
Yeah, and for sure Polish equipment acquisition can help bolster that deterrence.
Exactly.
Now, on that, I have a bit more technical question. Based on your research, on your insights, I mean, of course, it's sometimes difficult to judge it from the outside because we're just analysts. We don't have access to the secret info. However, looking at the open source intel that you're knowledgeable of, how would you assess the extent to which the Polish equipment is correctly integrated into the army as a system, as opposed to, it's serving just an isolated role?
Okay, that's a very, very hard question. So I will answer it by the little tail. I think in many parts, Polish army is much more advanced than many other European armies on integration, such as UAVs. Polish armies has been looking at what is happening in Ukraine since Crimea annexation and the whole Donbass war, and we think that actually currently, for example, it's an example, the Polish ground forces has the best UAV ISR system connected ecosystem in Europe. The most numerous, the most well known by the soldiers, and the most maybe resilient, especially as they learned a lot from the war from the last 10 years, but also from the last 3 years. And we see in France that we are still struggling to integrate properly and as a system UAVs. You have units, initiatives that are very interesting because we need this acculturation to UAVs. But we lack the system of ISR on army-sized system. And this is also, it's in the study, one aspect where France can learn from Poland. So it's not, it's not a one-way relationship. But taking as a whole, it's very hard to say. Of course, Polish artillery direction system has been implemented on HOMAR K and A. So my best guess would be that it will come with time. Of course, it's new system, but they are being delivered pretty fast. So maybe in 2022 it was a bit like a fair and everybody was buying anything they wanted. Now they are being delivered, so they will have to work together, and we still have time. It will come. If it's not already the case, of course.
Sure. Lastly, to kind of end our interview, I'd like to ask you, aside from demography, do you see another major obstacle, major challenge for Polish modernization? And also, aside from the things we've already touched upon, what is your reason for optimism with regard to the Polish plans?
Okay. Of course, demography is something we already talked about it. I fear that, why is Polish citizens so okay with the investment that are being made? It's because they are scared, of course, Russian invasion, history trauma, logical. it's also because the economic situation is really good in Poland. Will it last? And what can happen if the growth goes from 4 or 5% to 1 and less than 1%, as it is in the most of European countries? Will the Polish citizens be that interested in defense? As even if Poland was not very into social welfare before the 2015, peace era changed it deeply, and even if it's still far from the Scandinavian, as an example, system, I think people are getting used to it, and it will be very hard to come back if the situation is hard. Right now in France, we are wondering about getting to 3%, and everybody is like, oh yeah, but you will have to take the money from school, from healthcare, things like that. Going back to fundamental of states like security, defense, justice, and to cut in social expenses is very hard. So that would be one of my attention points for the coming years, especially as the current growth in Poland, I'm not an economist, but I've made several interviews with them, might not last after 2027 or 28. Or it could change deeply. Right now, as the average salary in Poland is growing so much, and of course it's very good for the Polish citizens, and also given the 2% unemployment rate, the problem is that many industries with limited added value products are leaving Poland for less expensive countries. So these are dynamics of long run that could be a problem. Then it could bring to power political forces that are a bit less enthusiastic about defense. Right now, peace, KO, same. It seems, from my point of view. We were maybe expecting Tusk to cut maybe some contracts as the audit within the armed forces is going. We'll wait until the presidential election in Poland to see if maybe with a same president, same prime minister, it will change. But that kind of dynamics we have to keep an eye on.
Sure, and just one last question, because when you talked about the determination of the people to defend their country vis-a-vis the vision of challenges, and particularly, some form of higher economic austerity, a big concern that Polish analytical circles have with regard to the credibility of Western Europe as a security provider is precisely that, because you guys also have your economic problems and dilemmas, in some areas perhaps more acute than the Polish ones, and at the same time, whereas Russia poses a existential or close to existential threat to the East, it does not so much pose an existential threat to the West. It's more about your place in the world, your prosperity, of course, but it's not something that will eliminate your statehood. So isn't it that perhaps, it's kind of a provocative question, but isn't it that perhaps the Poles, in order to have a more credible posture vis-a-vis Russia, should focus first and foremost more on the original alliances with the Baltics, the Scandinavians, maybe countries like Romania, and only then look towards partnerships with the Germans and the French?
I think that position was pretty valid 2 years ago. Now, looking at what is happening in several countries, like speaking about 3% in defense in France, 3 years ago, it was no-go. Totally no-go. Like reaching 2% was already seen as a huge effort. So now that the US is leaving, maybe even the Western countries are feeling a bit unquiet about, is Russia an existential threat to us too? I think if Russia is actually an existential threat to the Eastern Europe, it is to Western Europe, maybe on a longer run, but it is. And again, it's by staying together right now that we can avoid, deter an aggression. Conventional, hopefully, or nuclear deterrence. But that's the only way we can avoid being attacked, by being taken out one after the other, especially without the US. Or even as the US supports Russia. Time will tell. But for now, I think the situation is very different from 2 years ago. I hope it's not only speech, tweets, useless meetings. I hope it will get on something hard and for long term. But for that, for now, I'm maybe a bit more optimistic than 2 years ago.
Thank you very much. I would say that's a great thing to finish our interview on. I hope we can bring this optimism to practice and cooperate together to achieve a more stable, secure and prosperous Europe. My guest was Léo Péria-Peigné from French Institute for International Affairs. I hope you don't take the offense if I compare you to the French version of CSIS, because many people in Poland simply don't recognize European think tanks, but hopefully that will change, especially under the current geopolitical circumstances.
The French OSW is good to us.
Sure. Thank you very much, Léo, and
Thank you.
I hope we can talk again soon.